Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here with me. I'm your host Sherry, and you are listening to From the Dark Side. On April 26, 2005, an emergency operator in Durham, North Carolina receives a disturbing call from a man named Raven Abaroa who is hysterical. He's screaming, "My wife is dead, she's been shot." He's so hysterical that they can hardly make out what he's saying. You can hear the cries from a baby in the background. Police and paramedics make their way into the home. Raven leads them to the bedroom, where his wife, 25-year-old Janet Abaroa, is deceased. My sources are in the description area. This is episode 125, The Case of Janet Abaroa. We're going back to 2005 for this one. The most popular TV shows were Without a Trace, American Idol, and CSI. Jamie Foxx won Best Actor for his portrayal of Ray Charles, such a great movie. A gallon of gas was $2.30. Minimum wage was $5.15 an hour. And in weird news from 2005, 23,000 dominoes were set up for a domino chain for a world record. But before it began, a sparrow flew down and knocked one of them into another, causing a chain reaction. The sparrow was shot and killed, and the shooter got a deserving large fine since sparrows were endangered. Janet Abaroa is 25 years old at the time of our story. Her husband's name is Raven, and he is 25 as well. They are pretty similar. They both come from large Mormon families. Janet is one of 10 children. Both Raven and Janet were soccer players at Southern Virginia University. They met in 1998 and began dating. And in 2000, they had a large wedding in Washington, D.C. Family and friends say they were the best couple. Raven was especially charming. Janet's family loved him because he spoke of his mission trips to Peru, and he was charming and charismatic. He really won them over. She's got 9 brothers and sisters. He's going to have to really work to impress them, and he did. The marriage seemed picture perfect at first. Raven and Janet both landed really good jobs at a sporting goods company in North Carolina, so they packed up their Virginia home and moved to North Carolina. They rent a house on Farron Drive in Durham, North Carolina. It's a beautiful 3-bedroom house. It appears like it's nestled in the woods, but it's not remote whatsoever. There's neighborhoods near the house, but to get to their house, you have to turn off the main road and drive down a gravel driveway. There's trees around, so you can't see the house from the road. Things aren't always what they seem. Family and friends of Janet began to notice some turmoil in their marriage. For starters, Raven, as wonderful of a man as he was and everyone loved him, was beginning to show a much different side. Janet confided in family and friends that Raven berated her often and was mentally abusive. He called her terrible names and was mean and a bully. A friend of Janet's named Brittany told NBC's Dateline that Raven began to take over Janet's life. He was very controlling. Brittany says Janet would call her and say, "I'm not supposed to be talking to you." She said she had to walk to find a payphone each time she wanted to talk to her. Janet's friends were shocked because Janet was such a strong, smart person, but she was being controlled and a victim of domestic violence. Raven denies this and says it's all made up. He said he has a strong personality, but he never overpowered Janet to the point where she wasn't allowed to interact with her friends. In 2004, Raven comes to Janet and tells her he's been having an affair. Allegedly, it's not just a singular affair. He's been cheating on her frequently with several other women. Raven says he no longer wants to be with her, and he moves out of their home. Janet is devastated. Her marriage is over. Her husband's been cheating on her with God knows how many other women. They work in the same building, and now it's super awkward. Not long after Raven moves out, Janet learns that she is pregnant. She doesn't know what to do now. She doesn't want to raise the baby as a single mother. She and Raven decide to give their marriage another try, and he moves back into the home, promising he will never cheat on her again. In late 2004, Janet gives birth to their son, who they named Caden. Janet's friend Brittany said, "The loving, charismatic Janet that I knew no longer existed after being in a relationship that was so abusive for so long. Her only motivation once Caden was born was Caden and keeping Raven happy." Caden was her world. She loved being his mom, and he brought her a lot of joy. But the family had a new issue. Raven is fired from his job at the sporting goods company for embezzlement. Basically, he was stealing sports equipment and reselling it on eBay. A total of $15,000 worth of equipment was stolen. Not only did he lose his job, he's got criminal charges for this. Janet, who is now humiliated, resigned. She couldn't continue to work there with whispers around the place about her husband. Now they are both unemployed and they have no money coming in. Their son Caden is only 2 months old. They had to turn to their church for help. Their church helped them pay bills and provided money for groceries. Their landlord agreed to let them live rent-free for 2 months. They seemed like a nice couple, and he knew they had this little baby, and he felt sorry for Janet and Caden. They both have expensive car payments, and Raven has a motorcycle payment, and they have all these expenses that they're not going to be able to keep up with for very long. Raven did end up finding another job as an omissions specialist, but the salary wasn't nearly what he had before. Plus, they don't have Janet's income now that she had to resign. She did get another job eventually, but money is extremely tight. Raven seems to be just screwing up all over the place, cheating on his wife. She takes him back, which she didn't have to do. He repays her by stealing from the company they both work at, ultimately costing both of them their jobs. On the night of April 26, 2005, Raven is going to go play indoor soccer. He does this often. He and a group of guys get together and play soccer. It's about a 35-minute drive for Raven to get to Morrisville, where they play. Janet had just put baby Caden down for bed and was in bed herself watching TV. Raven says his goodbyes and heads to meet his friends. He makes the trip to Morrisville and plays soccer with his friends. After the game, it's about 10 p.m. Raven makes the 35-minute drive home, stopping only once to pick up a sports drink from a convenience store. He arrives home around 11 p.m. He goes inside and first he checks on Caden, who is sound asleep, but when he goes into the other room, he sees a startling sight. He calls 911 and screams, "My wife is dead." The operator asked what happened. He said he just got home and his wife has been shot. There's blood everywhere. Get here now. When emergency services arrive, they find 25-year-old Janet deceased. But police say she wasn't shot. She was stabbed 3 times, once in the neck, once in the chest area, and once in her hand, which they assume is a defensive wound. Now, I can see how Raven may have thought she was shot. He just comes home and sees blood everywhere and she's dead. To the average person at first glance, it may appear like a gunshot wound. 6-month-old Caden was unharmed, so that's a huge relief. There's nothing super out of place. It doesn't appear to be a robbery. The only thing missing is Raven's laptop and one of his knives. He was a specialty knife collector, and one particular knife is missing. Janet's wedding and engagement rings were sitting out in the open since she took them off at night before bed. They, along with other expensive items, weren't touched. They did find a lot of blood on the floor, some on the wall, and some near a side door, but there's no evidence of a break-in. Police spent 24 hours in the home collecting evidence and bagging items. Raven calls Janet's family and he has to break the news, but he tells them some additional information. He tells them that Janet is dead and that she committed suicide. He's also allegedly telling members of his church the same thing. Her family doesn't buy it. Even the police are like, "Who said anything about suicide? This is 100% a homicide." Raven reiterated that his wife was in bed when he left to go play soccer. He stopped at a convenience store on the way home to pick up a drink, and then he came home and found his wife dead. In those very early days after the murder, Raven had stayed with some of Janet's family. They see his duffel bag sitting out and want to take a look. They're not totally convinced at this point that he isn't involved in their sister's death. Inside the duffel bag, they find a CD, so they want to check it out. It was a backup of all the files on Raven's laptop. Remember, Raven's laptop is missing. That and a knife are the only inventory missing from the house. Well, it's odd that he backed up his entire laptop to a CD and the files were dated just one day before Janet's murder. That's a big red flag. There were some other things her family found out, such as all those mission trips to Peru were a lie. He never did any of those things. There were other red flags as well. For example, he's telling people that she committed suicide. Sometimes his stories change. He told someone she was found in bed, another she was found kneeling next to the bed. One person says he told him that Janet was alive when he found her, and she even spoke to him asking, "Why do I hurt so bad?" As well, they have 2 dogs in the house. Janet liked having these dogs in the house when Raven went to his soccer games. Well, the night of her murder, the dogs were found outside in their cages. She never put the dogs outside in cages when Raven wasn't home. Some speculate that Raven put them out there so that they couldn't interfere with whatever's going on inside that house. Some will say the police were hyper-focused on Raven and completely ignored the other evidence, such as a shoe print found in the home that didn't match anyone. This shoe print will get brought up a lot because it's thought to be linked to one of the first responders who was on the scene. There was also supposed unidentified DNA found in the blood. The autopsy confirmed that Janet had been stabbed 3 times. It also confirmed something that Raven said he was unaware of. It confirmed that Janet was pregnant. She was in the very early stages, like just a few weeks. She didn't announce this to everyone yet. She did tell one friend and said Raven was going to be angry. We learned that Raven had recently taken out a life insurance policy for himself and Janet. Janet's policy was valued at $500,000. The odd part was that as hard as they were struggling financially, they're accepting money from the church, they can't pay their car payments, money is very tight. Raven never missed a life insurance payment. Every month it was made on time like clockwork. You'd think, they're both young and healthy. Maybe that would be the first bill that he would skip. Raven takes Caden and moves across the country to Utah. I know this looks bad, really bad, but his whole family is in Utah. The only person he had in North Carolina was his wife, so I can see him getting out of there. He likely needs his family's help with baby Caden. But what bothers me is that Raven doesn't check in weekly to see if there's been any updates. Did you guys catch my wife's killer yet? He doesn't keep in contact with the police. Most people would be calling in every week for a briefing. In August of 2005, Raven has to leave Utah for a few days. He's got to fly into North Carolina so he can go to court for those embezzlement charges. He pleads guilty and is told he has to pay back all the money he stole. He is also placed on probation for 2 years. The court agreed to let his probation be transferred to Utah since he wasn't a North Carolina resident any longer. For the next couple of years, Raven doesn't reach out to the police and isn't asking for any updates. He does make one appearance on NC's Wanted to talk about the case, but that's it. The police back in Durham, North Carolina are still keeping tabs on him. In fact, they're working with the FBI on this case. In December 2007, this is almost 3 years since Janet's murder, Raven begins dating a woman named Vanessa. Raven was a single dad, Vanessa was a single mom. Both of their kids attended the same daycare, so they ran into each other a lot during pickup and drop-off. They hit it off and shortly afterwards began dating. Vanessa fell deeply in love with Raven. He was like a dream partner to her. He wined and dined her, and he was great with her young daughter. She asked Raven, "What happened to Caden's mom? Why is Caden with you and not living with his mom?" Raven explained that he lost his wife 3 years prior. She was murdered by an intruder. He tells her that he was the one who came in and found her. Obviously, Vanessa was shocked by this and felt bad for him and Caden. So Vanessa goes home and she does what any person in her situation would do. She pulls up Google and spends half the night learning about this case. Her father has been a police officer most of her life, so she knows what she's looking for. Vanessa isn't completely sold that she believes Raven is innocent. She figures the best way is to ask him, "Did you have anything to do with your wife's death?" She even got him to sit down with her parents. Again, Dad is a retired cop, so he is used to interrogations. They ask him, "Were you responsible for your wife's death?" Raven begins crying and says, "I loved my wife." But he didn't deny it. He just kind of danced around it. Whatever Raven told Vanessa privately put her mind at ease, and she was convinced at this time that he didn't have anything to do with Janet's death. She believes him when he says he came home and found her murdered by an intruder. Vanessa and Raven's relationship is getting more serious, and Raven proposes to her. She says yes, and they have a wedding planned for September 2008, just 9 months after they started dating. Things are moving very quickly. Things seem to be going well for Raven and Vanessa, until one day, Vanessa receives a phone call from some of the women in Janet's family. They somehow tracked her down and got her phone number. They're complete strangers to Vanessa, but they tell her that they learned Raven was engaged to her and we need to make sure that you're aware of some things. Have you ever seen the movie Ghost when Whoopi Goldberg tells Demi Moore, "Molly, you in danger, girl"? That's basically what this phone call was. They tell Vanessa, "I know you don't know us, but we are the family of Janet, his former wife. You need to take your daughter and get out." They wanted to make sure she was aware that he was being investigated for the murder of Janet, their loved one. Vanessa hears them, but she stands by Raven's side. After all, he was amazing to her and hadn't done anything to make her believe that he wasn't telling the truth. He was also upfront about why he was a suspect in his wife's death. He says police didn't have anyone else on their radar that could be responsible. Vanessa was blinded by her love for Raven. He was a good partner to her, and he treated her daughter very well. But Vanessa soon learns that Raven has a dark side. She says on the day of her bridal shower, they got into an argument. He began berating her and screaming that he wouldn't care if she died. He poked her in the chest hard with his fingers. He shoved her into a wall. And then he held his hand back and swung it towards her face, stopping right before it could hit her. Vanessa flinched, and Raven walked out of the room laughing because she flinched. Vanessa is crying her eyes out, and he's just laughing at her. Imagine the fear and humiliation at that moment that she felt, especially because this is right before her bridal shower. It's supposed to start and she'll be celebrating her upcoming marriage to this man who just attacked her. She showed up an hour and a half late. I know it's easy for all of us to sit here and say, why didn't she just call off the wedding? I don't have an answer for that. Maybe she thought this would just be a one-time thing. Maybe she was afraid of what would happen if she tried to leave. The couple wed in September 2008, and Vanessa says that on the night of their honeymoon, Raven began talking about Janet, saying he was mad after she died. Then he tells her, "I promise I would never hurt you." I mean, most people wouldn't have to say that. Over the next few months, Vanessa says this other side of Raven continued on. Yelling, controlling, telling her friends that she had mental illness. According to ABC News, Vanessa says he would push her down and then try to convince her later that she had fallen. According to WRAL News, it all came to a head on Christmas Eve 2008, just 3 months into their marriage. She told the news station, quote, "He was in the process of cursing me, calling me names, saying how he hated me, telling me he didn't care if I died. Then he said, "You know what? I want to hit you so bad, and I can't get in trouble for it anymore." She didn't understand what he meant about, "I can't get in trouble for it anymore." He begins pushing her around in the bathroom and wouldn't let her out. Later, as Raven was leaving, she says he went downstairs and grabbed Caden and said, "Come on, we have to go. Mommy doesn't want us anymore." Wow. At this point, Vanessa gets in touch with the police in North Carolina and says he's an abusive husband and she believes he killed his first wife. She's willing to work with them now to do whatever she has to bring him down. The case gets a fresh set of eyes with a new detective. This is the 5th detective assigned to this case, Detective Soul. He tells ABC's 2020 Raven couldn't keep his lies straight. He says he kept giving him conflicting details that you wouldn't get wrong if you were telling the truth. Detective Soul analyzes the 911 call and says the most important clue about that call is not once does Raven ever ask for help with his wife. Yeah, he's screaming and yelling, but he's not asking what to do to save her. According to reporting from the News and Observer, on February 1st, 2010, this is almost 5 years since Janet's murder. Raven is arrested and charged with murder. He had since moved to Idaho after he and Vanessa split up. 2 weeks after his arrest, he was extradited to Durham, North Carolina. Detective Soul is reviewing the crime scene photos, which are now 5 years old. Something stood out to him that no one had noticed before. Raven had told police that Janet was in bed watching TV when he left that night. Detective Soul sees in one of the photos that Janet's contact lens case is sitting out on the bathroom counter and one of the lids was off, almost like she was in the middle of taking her contacts out. I understand this completely because Janet does what I do. Before she goes to bed, she takes out her contact lenses. She gets in bed with her glasses and watches TV. I can't even take a nap on the couch with my contacts in. I would never get in bed with my contacts in. I even bought special contacts that you can sleep in, and I still refuse to leave them in for more than about 12 hours or so. So the million-dollar question here is, was Janet wearing contacts when she died? If so, she was not in bed watching TV like Raven had claimed. If her contacts were out and in the case, she was likely in bed. The autopsy doesn't say if she was or if she wasn't wearing contacts. We can't tell from the police photos if the contacts are in their case. So there's only one way to find out, and you guys know where this is going. In July 2010, Janet's body is exhumed. Her body had been buried for 5 years. Detective Soul said the exhuming was something we didn't want to have to do unless we felt like it was going to be necessary. The medical examiner finishes the procedure and he determined that she was wearing contacts. They were just fragments of contacts at this point, but sure enough, there was a piece of an AccuView contact lens on her eyeball. Detectives believe that Raven killed Janet that night. Then he had to make a timeline for himself. He left his baby alone in the house with his dead wife. He went to play soccer where he would have 12 or so other men be able to vouch that he was there. Then he stopped at a convenience store so he could be seen on surveillance camera in the store making a purchase. Then he goes home, finds his wife dead, and calls 911. His alleged motive was one of the oldest crimes in the book. He was broke and wanted money. He liked nice things. He could have a better lifestyle with a $500,000 life insurance payout. It's going to take years for Raven to go to trial. By April 2013, he had been in jail for 3 years, and the trial is just beginning. Judge Orlando Hudson oversaw the case. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he was also the judge in the Michael Peterson case and the Duke lacrosse team's case. They asked Janet's family if they would like to pursue the death penalty. North Carolina is one of the 21 states that still has the death penalty. Their method is lethal injection. Janet's family says no because they didn't want Caden to have two deceased parents. Caden is only 9 years old at this point. Raven's attorneys asked to have the entire case dismissed. Their argument was that there was evidence left behind at the crime scene that could have cleared Raven, but a cleaning crew was sent in before it could be collected. But Judge Hudson denied their request. The trial began and lots of witnesses were called. Lots of Janet's friends and family all testified that Janet was terrified of Raven. The prosecutor wants to make sure everyone sees what kind of character Raven was, so he calls up women from his past. One woman claimed that while he was married to Janet, Raven brought her to their house and put on a sex tape of him and Janet. She's like, what the hell is going on? Janet came home from lunch and he made the woman hide in a closet until she left. It was all very bizarre. Another woman said that she slept with Raven while he was married to Janet, and she asked him, what if your wife finds out? And he said, don't worry, she won't. Vanessa, who was Raven's second wife, was called to the stand and told the jury all about her storybook whirlwind romance with Raven, and then how he quickly turned on her and abused her mentally and physically. They play a video that Raven had made holding up a knife, saying that the police missed this when they were at the house collecting evidence. The police say there's no way it was missed. It wasn't in the house or they would have found it. Raven's defense team claims that he is innocent. They can admit he wasn't a good husband, he cheated on his wife, he embezzled money, but that doesn't make him guilty of murder. As well, they argue that the timeline doesn't add up. Raven and Janet had a member of their church visiting that night. He left before Raven did. They say Raven wouldn't have had time to kill Janet, change his clothes, compose himself, and make it out to their game on time. The other players said Raven did not seem out of character that night. This trial went on for 5 weeks. Between the defense and the prosecution, 80 witnesses were called and over 500 pieces of evidence were presented. The jury deliberated for 10 hours. They occasionally popped out requesting to hear the 911 call again or look at some other piece of evidence. Once they were done, they came out and said that they were deadlocked. 11 jurors said that he was guilty. 1 juror said that he was not guilty. They also agreed that they weren't willing to change their minds. Ultimately, Judge Hudson declared a mistrial. This doesn't mean it's over. Raven will have to be tried a second time. That means the entire trial will have to start all over again. So they tell him, look, you can go through a second trial. You may be found not guilty and you will walk out of that courtroom a free man. Or you may be found guilty and you will be sentenced to life in prison. But we have a third option. You can plead guilty right now to second-degree murder and be sentenced to 20 years in prison. What do you want to do? His attorney advises him of a fourth option. This is what happened in the Michael Peterson case. Raven is going to take an Alford plea. He's going to plead guilty, but not to second-degree murder. Instead, it's going to be voluntary manslaughter. This will make it so he doesn't have to go through another trial. In a nutshell, an Alford plea is when a person, in this case it's Raven, declares that they are 100% innocent, but they feel that there is too much evidence for them to be acquitted. The simplified version is that the defendant claims they're innocent, but they don't feel like going through another trial and possibly being found guilty, so they're going to take an Alford plea so they can get it over with. He has the legal right to do that. Alford pleas are rare. The Seattle Times reported in 2017 that only 6% of guilty pleas are Alford pleas. Raven told the court, I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'll receive a fair trial the second time. I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea to ensure that doesn't happen, and that's the only reason. I didn't kill my wife. Raven was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in prison. The judge gave him credit for time served, so that knocked years off of his sentence. And on Christmas Day, 2017, Raven was released from prison. A very quick Google search shows that he moved to Utah to be with his son. Vanessa told ABC News her advice for other women who might meet Raven is to stay away. She said, "Please listen to what's out there, what's available on the internet. Please don't be drawn in, and please get away as fast as you can." I don't know how I feel about the end of this case. It just doesn't sit right with me. Even though, according to reporting from ABC 11, Janet's family agreed with the decision because it spared them the emotional stress of a second trial. I'm interested in your thoughts. Do you think Raven killed Janet, or do you think he's a terrible husband, but he didn't murder her and instead it was an intruder and nothing was taken? Janet was murdered that night. Her son was only 6 months old. She missed all of his first things. She didn't get to see him grow up. He's an adult now, and he never got to know his mom. All he has are the stories that others tell him about her. Rest in peace to Janet Abaroa. That's it for this week, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care, and much love to you all.